topic is taboo, surrounded by stigma and shame. It's a silent and devastating epidemic with numbers that are really staggering. It's estimated that 1 in every 6 men has been molested as a child. 1 out of 6.
Good morning. You are plugged into Long Island. This is Joe Rock for Long Island's #1 rock station, 102.3 WBAB, and Long Island's #1 hit music station, 106.1 BLI. And my guest this morning is the president and founder of the We Are Many Foundation, Rich Byllott. Good morning, Rich. How are you?
Good morning. Phenomenal. Thanks for having me down here today.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So now we're going to get into this interview, and sometimes when we do this show, we range through all different kinds of topics. This morning, a very serious topic, and we're going to be talking about sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Now, you are a victim of sexual abuse. Or do you not like that term?
Well, you know what? That term is a strong term, and most people are victims of sexual abuse until they become a survivor of sexual abuse. You know, just because you're walking around the planet breathing in the air because you're in your 30s, 40s, or 50s doesn't mean you survived. You know, you're a victim until you become a survivor, which is getting over the effects of the abuse, which, you know, could lead you down different paths of life.
Okay. So now, with that in mind, at what age did the abuse start for you? Where did this all begin?
Well, actually, my sexual abuse started around 10. And to back up, you know, now that I'm a survivor and I went through years of the recovery process, you know, I got a lot of things answered. And to back up, I was physically and emotionally abused by my dad. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just, you know, hitting every now and then, but, you know, I was black and blue most of my life, most of my early life, up until 13. So I was being physically and emotionally abused, and then a pedophile entered our family. And that pedophile was a pediatrician. Mm-hmm. Okay, so when I went to get a physical at school, he probably saw the black and blue marks on my body, felt I probably came from a home that wasn't very strong, and quickly attacked. You know, what these pedophiles do is they, you know, they'll win the parents over so they can start grooming their kid, you know, to set him up to be sexually abused. You know, my parents, you know, thought this guy was the best thing since sliced bread because he was a doctor, he drove a Porsche, had a cabin up in Vermont. You know, they were very easily impressed. And, you know, he told my parents that I had some type of growth and blood disorder, and I was a little rebellious to begin with, so they said, okay, you know, you can handle my kid, so to speak.
Okay. Now, you say in there that he told your parents that. Was that accurate, or was that something that was
I have, to this day, I don't know. You know, I know I was on medication. I went to the hospital only once or twice in a 2 or 3 year period. And, you know, some people say, well, Rich, you know, even though you're physically abused, whatever, you know, why did you keep on going back? Well, what these guys do is the cat that he had in front of my face was I needed to be on medication. He said I need medication for my blood to, you know, get to where it needed to be and my growth. So as a 9-year-old or 10-year-old kid, doctor tells you need medication, you need medication. Yeah. You know, and then when I would rage out at home from the abuse, etc., my parents would call him up, and he'd say, well, cut back his medication. He's freaking out because of the medication that he's on. So that dichotomy of the parents and the doctor and a 10-year-old kid was all, you know, screwed up. Mm-hmm. You know, and if I thought I told anybody that was being sexually abused, if I thought I told my parents, they would, one, maybe not have believed me, or two, my father would have hit me more. Yeah. Or made it sound like it was my fault. Right. Because if it happens once, why is it continuing to happen? You know, and the first time it did happen, I thought it was a mistake. I said, this guy's out of his mind. You know, something's not right here. You know, but then it happens a second time, then you know that the first time wasn't a mistake, and you just have really no direction of where to go because of the environment that's in your home and the environment that's in that doctor's office, so to speak.
Right. So, now, one of the things you said that I thought was interesting, you said that, you know, your father might have thought that it was your fault. And one of the things I hear a lot is that a lot of kids will think that from the get-go. Was that something that was part of what happened to you?
Well, you know, it's first, you know, it's coming from an area where the abuser is in a position of trust. Mm-hmm. You know, so you could have a doctor, you could have a priest, you could have a coach, you know, and these people are in the places of trust, and the child doesn't think that they would ever do that to them, and then they think it's their fault because how could someone in that position actually do that, you know, and then you say, you know, well, maybe I liked it, but obviously you never like it, and you're fighting it the whole time. But there's these, character, that there's this grooming procedure that these pedophiles do, that to have this kid put in a position to, have this occur again. So you do think it's your fault, and you feel guilty, you feel ashamed, and when you have no outlet to tell, you're like, well, it has to be my fault, because why am I going back? Like, why is it still happening?
Right.
When it does happen, you can't even describe what's happening. You don't even know what's happening.
Yeah.
So now, it's a little rough.
Yeah. So now, as an adult, when you look back at that, do you think there's warning signs that parents should be keeping an eye on?
Without a doubt. When I look back, how the teachers in my school didn't know that I was so screwed up is beyond me. I was a walking example of someone who was abused, and not to say anything because, I was drinking at an early age, I was drugging at an early age, I was an outcast, I felt like I was living life on the outside looking in, never belonging to anything, etc. So there are definitely signs, and one of the biggest signs, if an adult is spending more time with your child than you are, it's an issue.
Yeah.
If you have a doctor driving your son home from his office, I mean, most parents probably wouldn't do that, but back in the 70s, when my abuse occurred, they were a little more lackadaisical, But again, if an adult wants to spend more time with your child than you do, it's a clear sign that there could be something that's going on.
Yeah. Now, how long did the abuse last for?
My estimate is probably about 2.5 to 3 years. Once I hit puberty, it was over. He was into prepubescent boys, So by the time 13 rolled around, the physical abuse of my father didn't happen anymore because I'd be swinging back at him, and I hit puberty, so there was no more sexual abuse from the pediatrician. So by 13, the abuse is right out of my life, And I look back now, and I'm like, I would, not that I would wish this, but it would have been nice as my father went in the same room with the pediatrician. So he could have beat the hell out of him, and he could have got sexually abused and left me out of the whole picture, because it's the adults that were screwing around my life.
Yeah.
In a trusting position, no less.
Yeah.
You have your father and you have a doctor. But these two guys, I wish would have went in their own little room and had their fun by themselves and left me out of the equation.
There you go. Well, once again, if you're just joining us, we're speaking to Rich Byllott, the president and founder of the We Are Many Foundation. So now the abuse ends when you hit puberty.
Yeah.
From the doctor.
Right.
And the abuse ends from there from your father because you're
Right.
getting bigger. But you're just about to enter one of the most important parts of your life.
Yeah.
But everything leading up to that was not what it should have been.
I equate it to I was in a perfect storm. From the age maybe of 2 to 13, I was in a perfect storm. And then, I was put on an island with in a normal civilization, and I was said, live, and it was very difficult.
So how did all this affect your adolescence? How did it play out? Where did you see?
Well, immediately, again, my fault. I had a lot of shame. I had a lot of guilt.
Let me just back up, because you made a statement there at the very beginning, and I want to just back up and correct that. You said, my fault, this, that. You thought it was your fault.
Yes, 100%. That's true. I just
want to clarify that for anybody listening. You may think that,
and I appreciate that 1,000%. I talk about it now and then, but absolutely, I thought it was my fault. I felt a lot of shame. I felt, a lot of guilt. So in my adolescence, I'd walk into other homes or deal with my friends or other people, and I'm like, wow, this what happened to me, I don't think happened to anybody else. And to describe what happened, was pretty difficult at that time to talk to anybody about it, because I didn't realize I was really set up, from the get-go, from the abuse that I had from my father. That really led me into being abused by this doctor, like an easy pickings, so to speak. Which I didn't figure out till I was in therapy. But as I said, how it affected my adolescence, I was in a lot of pain, and to cope was very difficult. So you turn to alcohol, and you turn to drugs, and you don't play in sports programs, and you withdraw, and you're like the kid sitting in the classroom that no one sees, so to speak.
Yeah.
And some of those skills, you develop coping skills, and some of these coping skills that you develop for your own protection, you end up bringing them into your adult life, and that's what really screws up your adult relationships.
Well, even still, before we get to the adult relationships, I mean, teen years, everybody's starting to date.
Right.
And, so much of what we look for in love, like...
Yeah, well, I'll be brutally honest. My first orgasm was at the hands of this pedophile. And I didn't even know what was going on. I didn't experience it a normal, natural way like most people do in their youth. Mine was horrific, and I didn't even understand it at the time because it was the first time that it ever occurred. And it definitely affected relationships in my youth because of that trust, or because I always thought someone would find out that I was sexually abused, and then I'd be exposed and embarrassed. Then how am I going to live 13, 14, 15 years old in high school when everybody knows that I was sexually abused? That was another dichotomy that plays into it. But yeah, the relationships, boyfriend and girlfriend at that age, wasn't special. I didn't have the tools or the emotional structure, because once you get sexually abused, your emotional structure dies. You don't have those emotional structure. You don't have the intimacy. Or the trust, etc. Until you can build that up again.
Okay, so now, in an instance where you should be building the foundation of relationships for your life, things are out of whack. And you said it affects your adult relationships. How did it affect from there going into your adult relationships?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, again, intimacy was a tremendous issue. Noticing the beauty of another person, especially a woman, noticing the beauty was difficult, And again, having relationships, again, my first experience of, again, the quote, that intimacy of an orgasm was at the hands of this monster. So when I would be with a woman, et cetera, everything would be great, I was enjoying it, et cetera, but then once that climactic experience happened, it was like, okay, it's over, I gotta go. It was like, bye, I can see you later. So I really knew how to deal with that. And from an emotional standpoint, I had no emotional structure inside. So if I saw somebody in pain, or if I saw someone having a bad day, or, as I said, in pain, or needed to talk to something because they were, feeling bad about themselves, I couldn't comprehend what they were talking about, because my litmus test was my pain and what I went through as a kid. So I could see a car accident on the expressway, and body parts could be laying all over the place, and I'd be like, well, so what? I mean, do they know what happened to me? Do they know what I went through? That's nothing. I want that, So, which is not normal, which is not normal thinking. So when you're with a group of kids, et cetera, and your thought process is that, well, you don't know what happened to me, so even though you fell down a flight of stairs and broke your leg, who cares?
Right.
So that from the emotional support, or from a support standpoint, to say, hey, how can I help you out? Are you okay? I feel your pain. I never felt anybody's pain.
Well, I guess it was, quite honestly, it was also, too, a defense mechanism. At a certain point, you have to say, I shouldn't have to deal with this anymore, so I'm just going to have to turn this off. Yeah,
because that's more exposure. If I had to deal with their pain, I would have to deal with mine.
Right.
And so it's a good point.
All right, so once again, if you're just joining us, we're speaking to the president and founder of the We Are Many Foundation, Rich Byllott. Now, when was the first time that you told anybody about this physical and sexual abuse?
Well, I was in the parking lot walking into a club with my girlfriend. I was about 19 years old. And I mentioned it to her. I said, Sue, I have to just let you know that I think I was sexually abused when I was a kid. This is what happened, boom, 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 boom. And she said, oh, mine, I can't believe that. It was probably about a 2 to 3 minute conversation. At 19 years old, went into the bar, had a beer, and never talked about it again. Until when I hit the age of 40. And I was a successful guy, having a beautiful family, nice home, a great job, etc., a lot of friends. And I had this lot of rage and anger going through my body at the age of 40, and I didn't know where it was coming from. And I always said to myself, well, it's not from that. It's not from my youth. There's no way this is coming back to haunt me. It cannot be from that, And so I would go to the gym. I would play the drums. I would do something, and it wouldn't stop. And people would say, Rich, you're raging out. You got a lot of rage and anger. So I said, okay, I'll go to a therapist. Now, going to a therapist, which I've never been to before. I said, okay, let me, I guess I'll open up the phone book and pick one from my next town, so I'm not going to a therapist in my town, so I go in there, and it's a second session, and, the therapist said, Rich, you were here last week for rage and anger issues, and what do you think they're from? And I was like a deer in the headlights, and I said, you know what? I stood up. I said I was sexually abused when I was a kid. I was sexually abused when I was a kid. I can't believe this MFer sexually abused me. And I must have ranted on for about 10 minutes. Jumped up off his couch, banging my hands. And I sit back down, try and catch my breath. And he looks right at me and says, well, were you good looking as a child? That was the first words I heard when I said, and when I exploded and said I was sexually abused. Those were the first words I heard. So obviously that set me back a little ways. I said, well, I guess this is no big deal. This sexual abuse must be no big deal if this is what I'm hearing. So about 8 months goes by. I didn't go back to him, and then I found this phenomenal therapist. Told her right up front, and we worked together for about 3 to 4 years. I did 3 double sessions a week. Went on Saturdays. And the miracles that we created, I was able to get my inner child back. Mm-hmm. I was able to get my emotional structure back. I was able to cry. I didn't cry for 30 years. And I was able to shed tears. And one of the strange things, I was enjoying ice cream again. Because I couldn't understand why adults would drive themselves to get an ice cream cone. I never. I said, why would an adult buy ice cream? What is the big deal about it? Mm-hmm. But we're all kids.
Right. Right. That's what it is.
We're all
that's
kids.
Definitely part of what it is.
And we all have taste buds. Mm. But for me, I can understand why is with an adult. But I was able to get some of my youth back, and again my inner child back, and my emotional structure, and my intimacy. And I feel like I'm walking around with a bouquet of flowers in my chest because it's great to live like this. Which I haven't done for a long time, but it's a very serious, hard work in therapy. And guys like, I just give a shout out to Mike Liu, phenomenal author of Victims No Longer. In fact, my therapist gave me a book, Victims No Longer, to read, and it's about men who were sexually abused as boys. And I said, Gail, I'm not bringing this book into my house. Do you ready your mind? I said, I'm married with kids. I'm going to bring this garbage into my house because, again, victim mentality. I wasn't there yet to read the book. Yeah. I start reading the book. It was like reading my own autobiography. Everything I experienced when I was a child, my coping skills that I had in my teens, in my 20s, in my 30s, all lied out there in the book. I must have dropped that book on the floor at least 2 or 3 times. There's days I couldn't get out of bed because I'm like, wow, am I this messed up? And how am I going to get back what I need to get back? But you do. It's possible, and you can. It's hard work, but you can come amongst the living, so to speak, as I say, to live with a bouquet of flowers in your chest. So Gail was a great help, and from being in therapy, I went to, I did create artwork, went to sexual abuse survivor shows, went to workshops. I was finally around other men who were sexually abused because I thought I was the only one. Yeah. Up until 40 years old, I thought I was the only guy sexually abused. I said, this couldn't happen to anybody else. It's not possible. Even though I would see it in the paper or on the news, I would discount it. I said, well, that's really not true. Right. But then I asked my therapist, I said, well, if there's other guys around here, I want to get into group therapy. I got to meet these men. I got to see how they live. I got to share my stories with them, And she goes, Rich, you're not ready for group therapy yet. And I was like, oh no, it was like I just felt like melting on the floor. But looking back, she's 100% correct. Yeah, I wasn't. And then when I was able to, and then meet these other men, that helps in the healing process. To know that one, you're not alone. You're really not alone in this, and there is a lot of help out there. There's a lot of resources out there. It's bittersweet to say, hey, I'm not the only one. That there's others out there. I wish there's nobody out there. Right. But the fact of the matter is a daily occurrence. It happens all the time. Which it shouldn't, but there are resources and material out there and people out there to help.
Well, I think one of the great things is you've certainly described something that is horrific. And I can understand you talk about the rage and anger you suffered
Yeah.
for years into your 40s, and I could certainly understand that. But I didn't meet you until this morning, and I walk out in the lobby to say good morning, and I meet a guy who's happy, who's smiling, who's genuinely glad to be alive from everything that I can determine. So that leads me to the question, and I think this really, is what we're here to talk about now, is what are you doing now? Tell us about the We Are Many Foundation.
The We Are Many Foundation, well, if I could back up just 1 second, and because this will lead into the genesis of why I created the We Are Many Foundation. In 2007, I went to a weekend of recovery, and I was in a room with about 40 other guys from across the country, and also from Canada, New Zealand, Australia, etc. They flew in, for this weekend of recovery, and that was in 2007. In 2010, I went back to the same weekend of recovery, and that's about 80% of the same guys were there. So I walk into the room, and these guys are coming up to me saying, "Rich, you look great. Rich, what are you doing? You look fantastic, unbelievable." And I said to myself, "Well, how bad did I look 3 years ago?" Like what changed, And then I saw a guy sitting there who looked like me 3 years prior. So I said, I got to do something. It's not. I didn't want to say it wasn't fair, but because of how I'm feeling and what I was able to conquer, so to speak, I said, nobody should suffer. There's no reason in this planet why any human being should ever suffer from sexual abuse. Because obviously we know it's no one's fault. It's not our fault.
Mm-hmm.
The shame and the guilt is on for society for remaining silent about it and not helping it out. Because, in my opinion, it's not taboo. This should be talked about at the breakfast table, at the supper table, in the schools, in the lunchroom, in the cafeteria, because it's silence that makes sexual abuse grow. By being silent about it, it's a friend of sexual abuse. So the more awareness you create, the more silence you break, the better we have an opportunity to help individuals out.
Well, I think
and
one of the
also
best
expose.
things anyone ever said to me about something like that, what grows in the dark dies in the light.
Right.
And that, to me,
Yeah.
is exactly what you just described.
Yeah. So when I said, what could I do? I actually wrote a play called Lemon Meringue. Okay, I showed it in the city. I had 4 shows. And what Lemon Meringue is, it's a play that I wrote and produced that is about my therapy sessions. That's supported through music and dialogue. Because I wanted to give back.
Yeah.
Because I wanted people to see what my therapy sessions were like and the miracles that got created in there. I wanted to expose it to everybody. And then when I was sitting back with the sound guy and the light guy, at the play, I'm looking at a sold-out audience, and I'm like, I got to create a foundation, the We Are Many Foundation. And what it basically is it helps heal and educate society on child sexual abuse, and that adults today are still suffering from the effects. There's a lot of agencies out there, and there's a lot of protection for the kids out there, which is phenomenal. But there's a lot of adults out there that are walking around who are sexually abused, who have yet to get help, or who still think it's their fault or shame. And the We Are Many Foundation wants to create awareness to the public and awareness to the individuals that they can heal from this. So some of the things that the foundation is doing for helping and healing is we're holding group meetings on Long Island for men who are sexually abused, who are currently in therapy, and they can get a letter from their therapist saying they're dealing with childhood sexual abuse and they're okay for group therapy. We're having a group on Long Island, which is great. That's the helping and the healing process. And the education process, what we're doing is we're awarding scholarships to juniors, a $1,500 scholarship to a junior in any school district that writes a paper on abuse in society today. So if they pick up 3 types of abuse, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying, if they write a paper, 2 to 3 page paper on abuse in society today, how it affects the individual, how it affects society, and what they would do to change it, whoever writes the best paper gets a $1,500 scholarship or $2,000 scholarship. And for us, for the foundation, it gets us to create a lot of activity in the schools, so it's talked about.
Fantastic.
And then in the awareness part, we're having a 5-mile run in Huntington September 7th, which BAB, thank you very much, is going to be sponsoring. You'll have your band down there. And I got to give a big shout out to BAB for this interview and helping us promote the run, which will be September 7th in Huntington. It's called the 5 Mile Run for the Many, professionally run. We'll probably have 600 to 700 runners down there, and that's going to create awareness. So there's a good buzz that's going on about the foundation in a lot of different areas, and we're getting a lot of support from the produce industry, which I work in. So it's really, we've only been doing this for 8 months. I have a great board of directors. We have a 501c3, and we're ready to rock and roll.
Great. Now, what's the easiest way if anyone wants to contact Foundation? Easiest way for them
The
to
easiest
find
way
you?
is just wearemannyfoundation.org. Wearemannyfoundation.org.
There you go.
Just go online, and everything's right there.
All right, fantastic. Well, Rich, I really appreciate you coming out here this morning. And once again, and in case you're just joining us, we have been speaking to Rich Byllott, the president and founder of the We Are Many Foundation. And certainly an inspirational story. And
I just appreciate that I could share it and tell it and just continue helping people out.
there you go. All right, thank
Thanks.
you very much. All right, once again, you've been plugged into Long Island. This is Joe Rock for Long Island's #1 rock station, 102.3 WBAB, and Long Island's #1 hit music station, 106.1 BLI.